should we just start?
Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast, Marianne.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be super interesting. So, just quickly for the listeners, who are you and what do you do?
That's a very simple question that's getting progressively harder to answer. So, the who I am is the easy part. My name is Marianne Bellotti. I'm an engineering manager at Auth0 currently. Auth0 does identity as a service, so basically logins. I'm on the infrastructure side of it, running shared services. So that's one part of what I do. My background is progressively more and more starting to focus on legacy modernization. So what do you do when you have a system that's like anywhere from 5 to 30, 40, 50 years old, still running in production, still mission critical, and is completely out of date? How do you rejuvenate it, re-architect it sometimes in place without disrupting service levels? And so that's like a little war game unto itself that I find incredibly fascinating. And so I sort of found my niche there, and I've kind of kept moving in that space, even now that I work for a company that is not that old. And when you think about a company that's like 5-6 years old in terms of legacy, the immediate thought is like, well, there is no legacy there. But there is, because like when you're a small company, you're operating kind of a swarm model, right? You have a certain number of developers, and they're kind of generalists, and they kind of work on everything. And so as you're building out the product, you're moving them from point A to point B to service to service to service. And there are always things that get built that don't find owners. And they're usually the things that are built the best from the beginning because they run really smoothly that people forget about them. And then you go on and on and on, and at some point you get to the organization grows and grows and grows, and now you still have these services that are without owners that no one's now touched in a couple of years. And so the first thing that happens is that people realize their dependencies are out of date. Like they're not on the latest version of whatever language it's in, and like they're at the end of life of something. And then they start to look at the system and they go, oh, okay, wait, if we do this, this is blocking that upgrade here and that upgrade there. And that's the place where people like me kind of jump in and go like, this is fun, let's do it.
I mean, it's really, really fun. I guess legacy starts a lot earlier than people think.
It's funny because I've heard so many different definitions of the word legacy itself. It's one of those words that seems super intuitive until you try to actually define it. So one definition that's super popular is that legacy code is code without tests. And then today, when we were listening to the keynote from Michael Feathers, he used a different definition of legacy, which I think was like code without an owner or something like that. And so it's like, it's hard to really define when something becomes legacy because technology changes so fast. So if it's simply that it's like a little bit of a different paradigm, like, well, that's not super helpful, right? No. Something built 6 months ago could be in a different paradigm, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm trying to grapple with this now myself because I haven't really thought about a definition either, but it feels to me that maybe it has something to do with the context around it.
Yeah.
I mean, if the organization or I have moved on or evolved in some way, then suddenly something is legacy.
It's very much like the expression, the old saying about pornography. I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it. So like, people don't know how to define what legacy is, but they definitely know it when they see it, right?
Yeah, and I mean, even if something isn't legacy by anyone's definition in the organization, it might still have parts which are definitely legacy. I mean, the main thing I work with is a React app, which we've been building on for a couple of years. And it definitely has those legacy type problems of these packages should really be updated someday. But if I try to update one of them, these other ones break. And I mean, it's not old by most definitions, but it still has a legacy feel to it in that way. It's not on the edge of what we would do today or even the best practice today. It doesn't have to be on the edge.
I think for me, the thing that drew me into this is that kind of like the organizational dynamics around fear, right? And like sometimes people are literally afraid of the legacy code base, right? They don't understand how it works, and like it may take down everything with it, right? But sometimes it's more of like the assumption that working with legacy code is boring. and that there are no interesting technical challenges there that sort of create this sort of like soft fear around like not being the best engineer on the engineering team, not getting to do the coolest stuff
you're
that's
stuck
available.
on the old stuff.
Right. And so I was just very attracted to those kind of concepts, and just in general, super interested in like I kind of refer to it as like code as an artifact of human thought. Right? Because my background, and one of the things that I'm talking about here, so my background is actually in anthropology. And so I gravitated towards it in the sense that like, I told somebody the other day, like, code is the new pottery shards, right? Like there's so many substitutes. But when you're looking at code, if you think about things in terms of Conway's law and like what we're talking about with the social technical aspects of how code gets developed, you're getting all of this evidence about how organizations and the people who wrote the code think and how they see the world. And so that was always the thing that drew me to it, was kind of looking at it in terms of that relationship. And what I usually found to be the case is that a person would say like, this system is absolute garbage. It's complete, like, and Nini might have built it because like there's no sense to it whatsoever. But like when we would actually go back and look at it in the context of the time it was built, it was actually built in a really sophisticated manner. So one of the first large scale systems that I worked on had built in like 1995 or so. And it was a globally distributed system of databases. And it was like, when engineers would complain about it, I was like, cool, it's 1995, how would you build this? And they would go, well, I would use X, Y, Z thing. I was like, wasn't invented in 2001. Like, but then I would do this. I was like, still wasn't invented. That didn't come in until like 1997. So like, it's 1995. How do you do it? And they ultimately come back to, crap, I probably would have done it this way. And I was like, yes, this is why we're here. Right? And it has worked for like decades.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's an interesting thing as well. Like stuff people complain about. Like, oh, this is old and crafty. Yeah, but it's kept working until now.
It's like that's what I find really, really fascinating about most legacy systems, is that they're actually really tend to be really effective at doing what they're doing because people are still using them. And if nobody was using them, they'd be easy to shut down and they wouldn't exist. So they're still online after, like, especially the ones that are like 50, 60 years old, they're still actually really good at doing what they're doing, right? So it's a really interesting space, and like fortunately for me, there's just like no limit to the amount of old stuff, right? People are writing stuff right now that in 5 years I'll be interested in because it'll be old stuff, right?
So how did you like start on the legacy path, so to speak?
It was really entirely by accident. I was at the time working for the United Nations. I was a data engineer, and they had a project called the Humanitarian Data Exchange that was just basically about, let's start opening up the data that we collect and that organizations that we fund collect to a broader population of humanitarian workers and the general public and journalists. And they were running an open data website. And so I came on to sort of be the tech lead for that side of their project, and worked on that for about 2 years, and was coming to the end of my contract with the UN, and was kind of getting a little anxious. But also felt like I would come into a much better situation if I had like another offer on the table that I could use as leverage. So I started kind of looking around, and I ended up interviewing for this organization called United States Digital Service. Some of your listeners may be more familiar with the UK version, which is called Government Digital Service. And this is becoming a thing that's spreading across multiple countries, because the oldest technology is government technology, right? And usually the most misbehaving technology is government technology. And it's also the technology that has the largest user base, right? And like a captive audience. Because a lot of times, like, you can choose not to order things on Amazon. You can't choose not to like get a passport or a driver's license or something like that, right? So I didn't know much about them. They were very new at the time, and I was just like, all right, well, I'll see what they have to say. And I ended up doing like 4 rounds of interviews and still didn't know very much about what they were doing. But had this great conversation as my final interview with one of their software engineers, where I thought, oh, they might actually like get it. They might actually know how to handle like these kind of problems sustainably. This is interesting. And I just really enjoyed talking with them. And so they were like, well, will you come move to DC? At the time I was living in New York City. Will you come move to DC and work with us for a year? And I was like, it's just a year. And I was at a point in my life where I really needed a change. And I said, all right, let's move to DC for a year. And then like fast forward 3.5 years later and I'm still there, right? So it that was the work. It was all legacy, and it was all like a lot of it had just been, it was great technology that had been very badly mistreated because the incentive structures were just all over the place. And so I found that I had kind of a knack for organizing engineering teams, especially out of like spare parts. And what I mean by that is that we'd have like contractors over here and contractors over there, and like some people who were federal employees over here. And like I'd have to go around and figure out like, okay, who actually knows what the hell they're doing versus like just as a job. And then I'd collect them from various parts of the organization and sort of pull them together in this ad hoc team and go like, this is the thing you already decided you wanted. I just tell me what I need to clear out your way to make it happen. And so like that was really what introduced me to engineering management. And then when I had run my course working in the federal government and wanted to get back into the private sector, that's what I looked for, is the opportunity to actually do that in the private sector. And I've been doing that at Auth0 for about 6-7 months now, and it's been great. It's been a lot of fun.
So a big change of pace, or is it?
There are some things that are very different, and then there are some things that are very similar, surprisingly similar. So the dynamics around how you modernize a code base are the same regardless of how old the code base is, right? And that was, I think, the thing that surprised me the most. I thought like, oh, well, we're talking about like things that are like 3 or 5 years old, so like it'll probably be like much different, and it wasn't. Like I don't have to talk about mainframes anymore. I don't have to look at COBOL anymore, but that's about it, right? That's a very superficial difference, truthfully.
Some little tech differences.
And then there are some things like, and I knew this coming into it, that like you have to sort of reacclimate to the non-government world, because the first time I went to a conference to give a talk, I reached out to essentially our developer evangelism team, and I said like, cool, so what's the approval process for giving a talk? And they were like, why would there be an approval process? And I was like, well, like you don't know what I'm going to talk on and what I'm going to reveal about the way my team works, or like what we're working on, and like I want to make sure that like I don't say something that might ultimately be damaging to the company. And they were like, what are you planning on talking about exactly? And I was like, and then that was the moment where I realized what I was doing, and I was like, you know what? It's okay. It's all right. It's fine. Never mind. So it's things like that. Like the government is a lot more severe in their command and control infrastructure than most companies are. And so like just reacclimating myself to this idea of like, no, they actually trust me, and like I don't actually need to submit everything in like triplicate to like get approval for things.
I haven't filled out a single form.
It's pretty nice.
So the different pace and flexibility, perhaps, in that sense.
A little bit. I mean, like we had a very privileged position, so I was able to have a lot of flexibility just through working with USDS more than other government people did. Like I would have these conversations with the partners, the agency partners I was working with, where they're like, well, we can't let you work remotely. And I'm like, cool, this is a conference call. All my whole schedule is conference calls, right? With people who are in Texas or like Alaska or like who knows where else. And I was like, do they know where I am when I'm on the conference call? And they're like, no. And I was like, then what does it matter where I am when I'm on the conference call?
You have a point.
They're like, yeah, all right, fine.
Yeah, and I'm guessing also if you sort of more or less started by assembling a team because you saw a need, then you're in a position where you're already carved out some kind of space in a way. And,
it was really interesting. What was really engaging for me is how often just momentum was enough, right? Like the people, and this is the thing that I would tell people when they were coming in and they're onboarding all the time, is that like, you are not going to give these people the right answer, right? They already know what the right answer is. They've just been blocked for like, in some cases, decades. And you will find people for everything that you think should happen to this system, you're going to find somebody, or at least one person, probably more like 5 people, who are just like screaming into the void in the basement of some government building, going like, why can't we do it this way? I want to do it this way. It's like, your job is not to come and tell them to do it that way. Your job is to find those people and then bring them to us so that we can like make sure they get what they need. And that's actually what the job is. And so like that for a lot of people is like the first introduction to what it is to be a really great manager, right? Because that is exactly what the job is when you're working in a private sector company as a manager. So like, I don't know that I would have gone down this route had I not had that experience, because I think I would have continued to think of management in the same way that most people in technology think about management, like the Dilbert pointy hair boss, like just sort of like useless technical person that like doesn't write any code sort of thing.
Yeah. I'm guessing anthropology background might have helped a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does, like being interested in how like people organize, particularly how they self-organize and like the complications there. Like I learned so much from running my engineering teams now. It's just like, it's like a PhD program that I'm in, because I'll just watch how they're working, behaving, and then I'll go, oh, cool. Like I know exactly what's going on right now, and I would not have anticipated that. But like now, if I'll just like tweak this just a little bit. And so as a result, they think I'm like a wizard or something, because I come in and I'll just be like, just do this little thing, and they'll think that won't affect anything, and then they come back a week later and they go, everything is different now.
This is amazing.
How did you know to do that? And I was like, I thought maybe it would work.
Powers of observation?
Yeah.
More or less?
Like I'm really running a lab and they just don't know it.
Ooh, that's the way to think about it. You're standing behind, the one-way mirror with your clipboard.
Just very, very detailed data analysis going on.
3% less oxygen.
Yeah.
But so when you started that, you weren't really thinking about it as management, or was it a management position in its definition?
So my current role, or
no, when you started assembling the team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I really thought of it as a manager role, because I don't know that I really, even to this day, I think of myself as being in charge of my teams, right? Like there's a philosophy called servant leadership, which is basically this idea that as the leader, your job is to serve the needs of your team rather than to like be in charge and tell them what to do. And that's always very much been my mentality on things. And so I don't know that to this day, I think of it as like a management role. I identify that that's what it is and that's what my job title is, but I don't know that I really think about it in that fashion. I am just super, super interested in what is going to make my engineers better engineers, right? And that's what I spend most of my time thinking about. So I had this very fun situation that's ongoing, but really kicked off like a week or two ago, where I had to teach one of my engineers how to mind map. And so for people who don't know what mind mapping is, it's like when I learned it, I thought, this is BS. Like, this is nonsense. But it's essentially this idea that if you have a formal taxonomy, you're using some sort of logic around how you're organizing information and categorizing it. With mind mapping, you're throwing all of that like logic out, and you're saying that you have subconscious associations with different concepts, and you're simply mapping out what those associations are. So if like you associate the word dog with the word ball, then you don't have to justify that in any way. That's the association. And so the reason why people do it is to try to like trace how they think and feel about certain concepts. And the reason why it came up in an engineering context is that I have somebody on my team who's like one of the most effective like debuggers and code reviewers I've ever seen in my life, largely because he's been moved around a lot in the company. And so he's been on different teams working on different internal systems. So he'll look at your changes to one code base and just kind of like go, oh, that will affect this other system over here in XYZ way. And that's literally everyone's reaction. They're like, how did you know that? Where did that come from? And so like he'll do a very quick test to confirm that hypothesis, and then come back and give you like a really amazing code review where he's like, well, because you've done it this way instead of this way, this will affect this system in this way, and all this sort of thing. And like, what I realized is that skill set wasn't being transferred over to the engineers that he was working with. That he was working with these engineers who had such incredible respect for him, but they weren't learning how to do that.
They see magic.
Yeah, it was just all magic tricks to them, and as a result, they were becoming progressively more dependent on him because they were oh my God, like he will see things that I will not see and never be able to see. And so the question became for me, like, that's bad. That is going to restrict the team's capacity over time. And also do him a disservice because he genuinely wants to go out and learn new things. And he can't learn new things if he has to peer review every single
everyone depends on him.
So I was like, okay, so what we need to do is we need to figure out how to teach people these subconscious associations that he has. And so I was like, God damn it, I have to teach him how to mind map. Like this strange thing that I encountered years ago that I thought she completely did not take seriously actually has like a really useful purpose in this one particular context. So a week or two ago, he came back and showed me what I asked him to do. Is I said, when you do pull request reviews, I want you to take notes on what you're doing, what you're thinking, and like if something feels like a thought occurs to you, just write it down, even if it doesn't make sense. And then I was like, the first output of that, I think, is probably going to be something very much like a checklist, where we're going to be able to give the engineering team just like a rough checklist of things to do and things to think about. And I was like, and then we'll take it and we'll build on it and we'll make it more mature, and hopefully we'll get something like a decision tree out of it next. And then like the final output will probably be something very much like a mind map, where we can sort of walk people through how you think about this architecture as a whole. And like they'll start to pick up on like where they should be looking and how they should be thinking. So this is an ongoing experiment that I'm running with my engineering
so
team.
Not finished yet. We don't get the end.
I mean, you'll have to invite me back, and then I'll give you a follow up about how this all ended up. But he actually when I spoke to him like a week or two ago, he was telling me. So there was there's a group I like to go to. I think it's a meetup group, and they did a special workshop on mind mapping, and I was just like, oh my God. He was like, yeah. He's like, so I went. It was really interesting, and then so he's actually working on it now, and I'm really excited to see what the output of it is.
I mean, that's really interesting because at least when I went to school, we were actually taught about mind maps.
Yeah.
So I mean, I do a little bit of mind mapping sometimes, but I don't think I've ever really thought of it or have heard it discussed as a way of like transferring knowledge like that. But it makes so much sense now that you say it.
Yeah. I mean,
this is roughly how it works inside my mind.
This is what I'm a big advocate for, sort of interdisciplinary engineering teams, right? So I've been talking a lot with since we're doing infrastructure, it's all back end, right?
Yeah.
And so I've been advocating to bring a designer onto my team, and the pushback I get from like my organization is, but you don't have any user interfaces. Yeah. I'm like, we do. It's called the command line, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right? It has lots of users.
Like I find that I have picked up all of these strange things just from like traveling and being in different industries and different sectors, and like they become useful at the strangest times, right? And so like no learning is a bad thing, right? You will find a way to apply it at some point in your professional career.
Exactly. And I mean, it's one of those things that I like about a multi-track conference like this, that I can walk into something that I didn't know about before and know nothing about, and get some ideas. Yeah. And they will be useful at some point. Yeah. Especially since they come from a different perspective. It's
really amazing to me how the mind stores information, because I can remember ages and ages ago when I was a very young software engineer sitting in a talk about CouchDB, and it went completely over my head. I had no idea what this person was talking about. And then like sometime later, I had been exposed to the same concepts over and over again, and I could actually remember things that he had said in that talk, and they then made sense to me. And so this is the thing that I tell like junior engineers all the time. Like if you're ever in a talk or a design meeting where you have no idea what's going on, just calm down, keep your ears open, pay attention, absorb as much as you can, because you will eventually come back to that moment, and like things will trigger about what was said that you're missing right now, but you won't miss it forever. It's amazing to me how that works, actually.
And it's really good, like you said, to sort of take the pressure off. I don't have to understand this now.
I'm just storing it for later on.
Exactly. Decompress it later. Also goes for conferences.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm taking stuff in now, and then I can process it later.
Yeah.
Yeah, legacy systems. And you wrote some fun blog posts about trying to get COBOL working in modern environments.
I mean, like, it's just amazing to me because I encounter a lot of systems that are ungoogleable. So right now, I do a lot of what's called formal specification, which for people who are not familiar is this idea of standardized syntax for specifications that you can use computers to model check. So the way it works, we generally do it with things like algorithms, but you can do it with other forms of technology as well. You roughly write out what the algorithm is supposed to do, its valid inputs, and then constraints on it, like what it's absolutely not supposed to be able to do, the things that are supposed to be impossible given the steps that it's taken, the inputs that it receives. And then you run the model checker, and it will check every conceivable state of that algorithm. It will, certain formal specification languages will run concurrency tests, and it will check to see if you're ever violating your constraints. And then it will tell you, like, no, if these bizarre series of events happen in this order, then this will totally happen. And so it's really fascinating. I'm currently, I had been working in TLL Plus for a really long time, and I'm now actually playing more and more with this specification language called Alloy. And it is the worst thing to Google ever, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because every time I go like, how do I do this in Alloy? I'll type in certain thing and then Alloy, and I'll get like all sorts of Google results for like metals and like heavy manufacturing, and I'm just like,
names are important.
So whenever I find myself in a situation where I'm working with a piece of technology that doesn't have enough content on the internet to actually like make it easy to Google and find information, I am inclined to start blogging about it simply so that there's some record of like the experience I went through for other people to find. And that was totally what was going on with the COBOL stuff. I was just like the whole setting up the emulator to like run a mainframe on a MacBook and like all of that and how that works, and the user interface for IBM COS. It's just like the documentation is out there, but good luck finding it. It's just like IBM's website is just a maze. And so I just started writing it down simply so that some other person who was working on the same thing could have a easier time of it than I had. And he had a great response. And I was like, oh, cool. I found this little niche where there is like very little content. So
and now people complain that your results
I know. Now I'm like in the top 5 for COBOL and mainframes on Google, which is sometimes very like problematic because I'm actually not an expert in either one of those things. I spent a little bit of time working on them. But mainly working around the strategy of like how to get off them and should you get off them in the first place, rather than like actually hands on a keyboard with the COBOL, right? And all the time I'll get requests from people to like consult or like help them on their COBOL mainframe and stuff.
Yeah, she must be good. She's the top result.
Yeah, I know. Design a program to help teach people COBOL, and I'm just like, this is real. I will tell you the people to go to that this is really not my wheelhouse.
So other people to ask about it. So what's the oldest systems that you worked with? Is those like COBOL?
Definitely COBOL. The oldest one was I guess 1960s. Wow. Maybe even older than that. And this was a bet that we will never be able to settle between me and the person I was reporting up to at the time, because when I found out that the thing they were using was a mainframe from, I think it was 68, I was like, oh my God, and they were using it as the ultimate data store for a web application, and it just like blew my mind. Like, I was like, how? There's no way this works. And it was responding within like, I think 2 to 3 milliseconds, which again, it was like blowing my mind. How is this mainframe from 1960s faster than the Java application? How is this happening?
It doesn't make any sense.
And there was actually a reason for it that I'll get to in a minute. But I went to my manager at the time, and I was like, I think they're actually still using the mainframe. And she was like, there's no way they're still using the mainframe. This has to be like a modern mainframe that they have an emulator for, and it's just the code from the 60s. And I was like, Yeah, that's pretty rational. That makes a lot of sense. But I gotta be honest, every time in this job I have said it can't possibly be this thing, it has actually been that thing. I was like, and the only way we're ever going to settle it is if we went to Martinsburg, West Virginia, which was a secure site, and actually saw the mainframe. And I put in a request, and they were like, no. No. I was like, come on.
Where's your sense of curiosity?
But I mean, I think there's a bet going on between me and my manager was not considered a valid reason to let us into a secure facility. So
people,
I will never know whether or not it was the actual mainframe from 1968.
Incredible. Yeah, I mean,
I would. The thing that made me believe that it might be is that they were still using magnetic tape, and so I was like, why would they be using magnetic tape if they had an IBM something from 2010, 2012? They don't use magnetic tape anymore. It's got to be the old machines in the basement.
So do you know? Do you have any idea how it could respond so quickly?
Oh yes, I actually did figure that out. There was this this system that we knew only as an acronym that was sitting in between the old mainframe and the web application. And I tracked down what it was, and it turned out to be newer mainframes that they were using effectively as a cache. So they would talk to the old mainframe, I think sometimes in certain times of the year, every day, but generally once a week, and get the updated data from it, and then the web application would talk to the much more modern mainframes. And mainframes, despite their reputation, are super super fast machines, right? So. IBM's still building them and still selling them, so
they have their uses.
They do have their uses,
and they last a long time. Clearly, I bet you can still get spare parts for the 60s machine as well if you really need to.
I don't know. I'm a little scared.
Yeah.
I feel like if you pay IBM enough money, you get spare parts for whatever you want, right?
Probably.
But I don't know. I wouldn't want to try.
Which is an advantage compared to the legacy system made out of 3-year-old node modules.
Yeah. It's true. I feel like we should stop poking at IBM, seeing as they are a sponsor of this conference.
I think this is poking in good spirit.
It's true.
We just said you can pay them to get out of your problem. They will solve it. Just off to another tangent, I guess. I read that post you wrote about the best engineering advice.
Yeah.
All of it's from non-technical people. I really resonated with that as well.
It was amazing to me how well that blog post did, because it had been in my head for a really long time. And I finally got to the point where I was happy with it. And I thought to myself, well, this is not super technical. And generally, the not super technical blog posts do a little bit less well than the technical ones. Yeah. I thought you'd probably get 14,000 views or something like that. And I'm very privileged to have a blog where I can say, 14,000 views or something like that. But and so I was like, I'll just throw it online and see what happens, because it really was very cathartic to write that particular blog post. And then I threw it online and I went to bed, and I woke up the next morning and it had 30,000 views by that point. And I was like, oh, today's going to be a fun day then. And I think it got, by the end of the day, 100,000 views in a single day. And it just kept getting picked up by mailing lists and different aggregates, and it keeps going to this day. So it was really very surprising to me how deeply it resonated, and I was very proud of how deeply it resonated as well. So that was a great outcome for something like that I thought was maybe a little too personal, and then I usually like to go with a blog post, but it worked out.
Yeah, but I think for that kind of thing, it works well to be a little bit more personal as well. Yeah. I mean, it resonates more, I think, when it's actually sometimes a real person, well, sometimes it's a real person you can point to and say, this person said this in this context. Yeah. Because otherwise it can become a little bit loose. Yeah. And it's more it's rumored that person said that thing once. But
right.
No, it's actually this person did that.
Right. I'm trying to force myself to get more comfortable speaking with authority, because this is very much gender bias in tech coming out. I come from a background in sort of the data world, so part of it is like wanting to find a study that backs up what I say, like 100%, or like maybe 3 studies to back up what I say. And when you see my talk, there's a lot of like graphs and data and studies involved in it. But then I think about it and I look at like my peers, and like a lot of them will just like say, this is my framework for XYZ thing. And it's like, it's a triangle. Yeah. It's like, it's like no basis in any kind of data whatsoever.
More gut feel.
Yeah. And it's like, I look at that and go like, if that is okay for my peers and my colleagues to do, why do I always assume that it's not okay for like me to do it? Like, why do I always assume like I need to have like scientific research in triplicate in order to say something? I've made an observation, and this is what it is, and this is how I interpret it. So I'm trying to force myself to gradually become more comfortable with speaking with that kind of authority. I don't know if I'll ever fully get there, because I am like very much in love with the idea of like doing research on things.
Of course. And it's always interesting to see, is this just my gut feel? Or are there other people backing
this? That's true too, right? It's always very nice when you can like, yes, my ideas about the world can be documented in other people's studies. Right?
Exactly. And it's not just all anecdotes. I mean, sometimes have you heard of a book called The Leprechauns of Software Engineering?
No, I haven't.
It's an incredible little book. It's maybe 200 pages in quite small format, and it's like basically each chapter is going through some like software engineering thing that's taken for granted, say like 10x engineers, and it tries to go back through sources and references and papers and see what is the origin of this, and can it be really backed up the way we think about it. And usually the answer is no. It's not like
hold on, I need to get on Amazon real quick.
This sounds great. Usually it's not like it's all based on like lies or misunderstandings as such, but it's more like a game of telephone. It's there's some grain in the bottom, but it's not what we turn it into eventually.
Literal mythology. Right? It's like the stories we tell each other. About,
exactly.
To be a software engineer.
And I think stuff like that is extremely interesting.
I was telling somebody the other day, like the difference between Auth0 is a company that was founded by 2 Argentinians, and so a huge portion of engineering is in Argentina. And so I was telling somebody the other day that what was interesting about that for me is that there are certain concepts that we associate with engineering in the United States that don't apply in Argentina.
Interesting.
So not technical concepts, but cultural concepts. So for example, last year on our corporate offsite, I brought some board games with me, and like most of the engineers were like, why would we play board games? In the United States, these two things are like geek culture and software engineering culture are one. It's like it's just assumed you play board games and you like anime manga and you like this and you're science fiction and all of this. Like this is just who you are.
And it's a pretty safe assumption here too.
And so, like as an individual, I can look at that and go, well, some of those things I like, some of those things I don't like, but I still make the assumption that as a software engineer, these are the general patterns of like how you think. And it was completely different in South America. And they're like, no. But also, I brought Secret Hitler with me, and once I introduced them to Secret Hitler, they were in love, and they wanted to play it nonstop.
Perfect. I haven't played, but I've heard about it.
It's great. It's a great game. It's an interesting game for our times, I gotta say. It's a great game.
And of course we'll link to that as well as everything else we've talked about. I like to make extensive links for the episode, so everyone should look up Secret Hitler. as well.
It's a fun game. It's a fun game, and Codenames, which is a way more interesting game to play with non-native English speakers, I gotta say.
We tried this at work.
You want to talk about like associations with concepts. It's just kind of like, where did that come from? Oh my God.
It's a fun challenge. I was thinking again about backing up with sources and stuff like that as well, and I think it should be much more okay to say that this is my gut feeling or intuition about it. I mean, I think the soft of software is so important. I mean, some stuff can be more of a hard engineering science, but so many things aren't, and those matter much more in the end.
Yeah.
Much of the time, at least.
I mean, it really is a gender difference, right? Like, that we know this about, like, the gender dynamics in the professional work environment, that women always feel like they need to bring more evidence, more proof, and speak with someone else's authority rather than, whereas men are just kind of like, well, you know, this is what I think, obviously.
Yeah, but I still think when men do that, it gets taken the wrong way by other men as well. Because everyone sort of assumes that, yeah, he said that as a fact, so he's got something to back it up.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, I can speak like that, and then I can look at someone else and assume they have a good reason, but I just said something.
Yeah. I just made that up.
Yeah, exactly. It felt good to say. Wait a minute.
And I would say that, like, the nice thing about wanting to have, like, references for things is that I've definitely seen, so when I worked for USDS, I reported up to Mikey Dickerson, who's a very famous SRE from Google. And Mikey Dickerson, when he was working on the first USDS project, which is healthcare.gov, created a version of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs for reliability. Right?
Oh.
And, like, this has become a meme in the SRE community. I have been to no less than 4 talks where someone has put up Mikey Dickerson's Maslow pyramid of needs for reliability on the slide as a serious thing that, like, was some, like, deep thought process put into it. And it's always so weird whenever I encounter it because, I don't think at all that Mikey intended it to be like now an industry standard, right? I know the kind of conversations we were in around this, and I think that for him it was just the easiest way to explain what were very basic concepts around, like, you probably should have some sort of monitoring on your system, right? You probably should know generally what the application is doing at any one point in time, which was like just from a technical perspective, it's like, yes, obviously, why would this even be a debate? But in the context that we were in at that time, the government, it was sort of like, well, why would we buy something like that? What does it do? So, like, this, I think, for him was just a really easy way to explain those concepts in a way that they could understand and access. And I don't think he intended it to go any further than that. And it's been spread is now, like, formally part of, like, the SRE, like, guidance for, like, just how you do things. And it's just, like, every time I see it, I'm just like, this is so weird because this is not what it was intended for.
You were there when it happened.
Yeah.
It's kind of dangerous if you accidentally almost happen to put something in too good a package. It takes on a life of its own. It's like, yes, they said it's like this. And now it's perceived as a rule.
And it's really interesting watching people who've had that happen, how it can run away, right? And it can be used to do the exact opposite of what you intended when you were trying to talk about it. So, like, Conway's Wall came up in the keynote this morning, and I imagine will continue to come up. And, like, if you actually read the paper that Conway wrote that kicked that off, a lot of what people use it to justify is not what he was talking about at all. He was essentially talking about communication patterns and incentive structures, and that not that there is a perfect organizational structure that will lead to perfect code, right? So it's really interesting when an idea sticks and then people start adapting it and applying it in different ways. You lose control over it, and sometimes it ends up mutating and, like, running off in this completely opposite direction.
Yeah, it's not yours anymore.
So this is the thing I live in fear of, is that at some point something I've said on the internet is going to be used in a way that I don't expect, and I'm going to be like, well... As
Marianne always said, it's like this.
Yes. Like, that's past Marianne. Past Marianne is always wrong.
Yeah, I know my past self. He had no idea what he was doing. I think we covered so many interesting things. Is there anything else we should throw in?
I don't know.
We'll link your session as well, of course.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. I hope you got everything you needed. I feel like.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. It was a lot of fun.
Yes.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.
I have a lot of friends who are still active in the COBOL mainframe legacy modernization space, and they'll come up to me and they'll be like, Marianne, every time I try to Google something, one of the first 5 results is something you've written. It's like you've ruined it. Like I can't find any information on the internet anymore. I was like, I'm sorry, really sorry. That was not the intended effect of my blog post.
No. But yeah, I guess they hit a nerve there.
Yeah, they really did. They really did. Like in general, it's gotten to the point where engineers that report up to me will now quote me in one-on-ones with me, which is so strange. And I'm just
weird.
like, please stop doing that. That's just like, no. First of all, that's not the way to win an argument with me. And second of all, like, oh God,
nobody can react to that.
I'm in the process of creating a little monster.
Yeah, it's starting to run away from you, like all kids growing up.
It really is. Yeah. It really is. So.